You don't want to die, that's not it. It's quieter than that. It shows up in small moments, like when your phone lights up and you don't feel like answering anyone, or when you imagine what it would be like to just step out of your life for a while and watch everything continue without you. Not gone forever, just absent, like closing a tab in your mind. And the strange part is you can't fully explain why. You just know that sometimes being here feels like too much. What you're feeling has a name, but it's not a diagnosis. It's a psychological pattern that many people experience at different points in their lives, especially when the mind is overloaded. In psychology, there's a concept called cognitive and emotional overload, where your internal system is processing more than it can comfortably hold. When that happens, the mind doesn't always ask for help directly. Sometimes it looks for distance, not because you don't value your life, but because your system is trying to regulate itself. Wanting to disappear in this sense isn't about ending anything, it's about pausing. It's your brain's way of saying, this is too much, too fast, too intense. And instead of framing that feeling as something alarming, it can be understood as a signal, not a dangerous one, but an intelligent one. Your mind is trying to create space where there isn't any, and when you begin to see it that way, something shifts. The feeling becomes less frightening and more understandable, like a language your mind has been speaking all along. There's also something deeper happening beneath that surface feeling. Human beings are not just social creatures, they are deeply self-aware creatures, and that self-awareness can sometimes become heavy. Psychologists have long observed that when awareness turns inward too intensely, it can create what's known as self-conscious overload. You start noticing not just what you're doing, but how you're being perceived, how you're coming across, how your existence fits into everything else. It's like standing in a room and suddenly becoming aware of every movement you make. That level of awareness is powerful, but it can also be exhausting. And in those moments, disappearing feels less like escape and more like relief from being constantly observed, even if the observer is just your own mind. The desire isn't to leave the world, it's to step out of that constant spotlight, to exist without thinking about existing. And that desire, while rarely talked about, is actually a very human response to a mind that has become too aware for its own comfort. Another layer of this experience comes from something called emotional saturation. When you feel too much for too long, even if those feelings aren't extreme, your system starts to look for ways to soften the intensity. It's similar to how your eyes adjust in a dark room after being in bright light. Your mind is constantly trying to find balance. But when that balance is disrupted, when there's too much input, too many emotions, too many expectations, the system searches for a reset. And disappearing becomes that imagined reset, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, almost gentle way. Just stepping back, becoming invisible, not having to respond, perform, or process for a while. This isn't avoidance in the way people often think of it. It's more like a form of internal buffering. Your mind is trying to protect itself from overload by creating distance. And when you understand it like that, the feeling starts to make sense. It's not random. It's a response to intensity that hasn't had space to settle. There's also a social dimension to this that's easy to overlook. Sometimes, the desire to disappear isn't about your inner world at all, but about how you feel in relation to others. If you've ever felt misunderstood, overlooked, or like you're constantly adjusting yourself to fit into different environments, that can slowly create a quiet exhaustion. Psychologists talk about this as social fatigue or role strain, where you're holding multiple versions of yourself depending on where you are and who you're with. Over time, that effort adds up. And disappearing begins to feel like the only place where you don't have to perform any version of yourself, where you can exist without being interpreted, evaluated, or responded to. It's not that you don't want connection. It's that the version of connection available to you feels costly. So your mind looks for the one space where there are no expectations at all. That space feels peaceful, and naturally, part of you starts wanting to go there more often. But here's where the deeper perspective begins to emerge. The same mind that wants to disappear is also the mind that notices everything. It's sensitive, observant, aware of nuance in ways that many people are not. And that kind of mind doesn't just experience more intensity, it also has the capacity for more depth. The desire to disappear often shows up in people who think deeply, feel deeply, and process the world in layers. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a byproduct of a system that is taking in more than average and trying to make sense of it all. There's a concept in psychology known as depth processing, where the brain engages with information in a more complex and reflective way. This can lead to insight, creativity, and empathy, but it also means the system gets tired more easily. So the urge to step back isn't a failure. It's part of how a depth-oriented mind regulates itself. You're not trying to vanish, you're trying to recover. And here is the quiet shift that changes everything. What if the desire to disappear is not something to fight, but something to understand differently, not as a warning sign, but as a signal of capacity? Your mind is not shutting down. It's asking for a different way of being. In many philosophical traditions, from Stoicism to Eastern contemplative thought, there is an idea that stepping back from constant engagement is not a loss, but a form of clarity. The problem is not the desire for distance. The problem is that modern life rarely gives you healthy ways to experience it, so your mind creates its own version. That imagined disappearing is your system trying to reclaim stillness in a world that rarely allows it. And when you begin to see it this way, something softens. You stop seeing yourself as someone who wants to escape life and start recognizing yourself as someone who needs space within it. And those are two very different things. There's one more layer that often goes unnoticed. Sometimes, the desire to disappear is connected to control. Not control over others, but control over your own internal experience. When life feels unpredictable, when emotions come in waves you didn't choose, the idea of stepping away, even mentally, can feel like the only place where you have full authority. In psychology, this connects to something called perceived control, the sense that you can influence your environment or your inner state. When that sense is low, the mind looks for ways to restore it. Disappearing becomes a quiet form of reclaiming space that belongs only to you, a place where nothing is expected, nothing is demanded, nothing needs to be managed. And in a world where so much feels outside your control, that imagined space becomes deeply comforting. It's not about rejecting reality. It's about creating a small pocket where your system can breathe again. And that need for a space that is entirely yours is not something to be dismissed. It's something to be understood with care. If this feeling has been quietly sitting in your life, I want you to know it doesn't make you strange or distant or broken in any way. It makes you someone whose mind is working hard to find balance in a world that moves quickly and asks a lot. Wanting to disappear in this quiet sense isn't about leaving. It's about needing space to exist without pressure. And there are more people who feel this than you think. You're not alone in this, not even a little. And your mind, exactly as it is still welcome here.